My name is Kobie Nel. I'm an artist and I have been invited by Scott Elliott at Bergen Kunsthall to participate in a series of artist talks as part of Bergen Kunsthall's online programming. I've used this opportunity to have a conversation with Julie Lillelien Porter, a Bergen-based artist and curator.
Lately, I've been spending a lot of time with the possessions of the dead, or should I say, the former possessions of one who was formerly living. Her house is being put up for sale, and in a convergence of unusual circumstances, I was brought in to help. I didn't know this woman, terminated by illness in middle age, but I have gleaned some things about the person she was as I was shifting through the objects that survived her. Walking in and around the work cottage in West Side Chicago, where she lived for 12 years, it takes no imagination to see that everything bears her touch. As I've sorted, cleaned, pulled books and tossed these dispossessed items, I've tried to thread a loose scrim, a texture of which to project a shaky silhouette of her. In this vision, she appears to have rigorous appetite for objects, a reflexive pursuit of knowledge, and a restless drive to build and cultivate. But who was she really? Since I do not have any of my own direct impressions, I rely only on the traces she left in the material world. When I encounter them, however, I find that most are strangely free of effect. I'm not moved when I place an armchair in the corner of the living room and see the indentation of her wiry framing and the cushions. A body is just the hand we are dealt, the chair a convenient glove. Even when I find a pair of broken pitchforks, presumably saved for future repair, I have no piercing revelation of her character. Weeding out the gardening tools is one thing, but it's still something else entirely to dump boxes of personal effects into a recycling bin halfway down the alley and steal glimpses of what falls out. It was a manila folder labelled Trip to Avignon that finally caught my breath. Like many others in the same box, it contained tourist brochures, road maps, postcards and notes from some time in the 1990s. It was mundane in the extreme, yet the fact of its deliberate accretion and its preservation until now seemed entirely remarkable. By the time we saw the notebook, in which she had meticulously detailed her own cancer treatment, I'd come to a realization. This woman was driven to leave impressions of herself in the world as much as it left impressions on her. In her mixture of care and compulsion, directed outwards and back towards herself, I recognise something I know well in many others. It may not surprise you to learn this woman was, if not quite publicly, an artist. I cannot tell you what she was truly like, but I can tell you something about her methodology of living. You're very fond of the poetry of Ingrid Jonker, Kobie. Afrikaans poet,
Yes.
woman. Lots of poems written in Afrikaans, which are difficult for me to read properly. So this is a writer and a poet who's inspired you and who you care a lot about. Could you tell me a bit about her?
I grew up with Ingrid Jonker, and I think Nelson Mandela explains her as a Afrikaner and an artist the best. He said that she was both a poet and a South African. She was both an Afrikaner and African. She was both an artist and a human being. In the midst of despair, she celebrated hope. Confronted by death, she asserted the beauty of life, because she committed suicide in the 60s. And she really came to my attention when Nelson Mandela read her poem The Child Who Was Shot Dead by Soldiers in Nyanga at the opening of the first Democratic Parliament on the 24th of May 1994. And then I was 10 years old and I was really mesmerized by this black man who was just released from prison, who read an Afrikaner's poem. That's how he started.
Mm.
And he showed so much respect and admiration for her. And being an Afrikaner, like Afrikaans was the language of suppression, of apartheid.
Mm.
But yes, like getting back to Ingrid Jonker, her life was fueled by gossip and rumors of her bohemian lifestyle. Maybe this is also a reason why she committed suicide.
Mm.
And Afrikaans, the language itself, has quite a unique wordplay, and I don't always think that it's good to be translated.
No, that's true.
But her work did place herself among the foremost poets in Afrikaans, and after her suicide in 1965, she really became an icon in South Africa and also a symbol of my childhood femininity, like Sylvia Plath or Anne Sexton.
Mm.
And this is one of the most popular sets of works of her. And here is the second edition that I found last year when visiting South Africa.
So this is Smoke and Ochre.
Yes.
It's also quite similar to Norwegian in a way, which is quite nice, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I can read you one of her poems and maybe also the translation of it, just to maybe feel the rhythm of like how she wrote and worked. So I'm going to read to you Bitter Bessie Dagbreek. Bitter Bessie Dagbreek, bitter Bessie son. 'n Spieël het gebreek tussen my en hom. Soek ek na die groot pad om daar langs te draf. Oral draai die paadjies van sy woorde af. Dennebos herinnering, Dennebos vergeet. Het ek ook verdwaal, klap ek in my leed. Papegaai bond ego, kirang my, totdat ek bedroe weer die koggel kry. Echo is geen antwoord hy al om. Bitter Bessie dagbreek, bitter Bessie son.
Really beautiful.
And yeah, I have the translation here for you as well. Bitterberry daybreak. Bitterberry daybreak, bitterberry sun. A mirror has broken between me and him. I try to find the highway, perhaps to run away, but everywhere the footpaths of his words lead me astray. Pine would remember, pine would forget. However much I lose my way, I step on my regret. Parrot-colored echo tricks me on, until I turn beguiled to retrieve the mocking song. Echo gives no answer, he answers everywhere. Bitterberry daybreak, bitterberry sun.
Lots of imagery in the poem.
Yeah.
Really beautiful, rhythmic and rhyme as well.
Yeah, a lot of rhyming.
So would you say that you feel, in a way, a connection to Ingrid Jonker? Or has she inspired you in any way in your artwork, in your practice somehow?
Yes, I definitely think so. As a Afrikaner woman myself, I often go back to her poetry. Since my childhood, I've been perplexed about what it means to be a white African and the displacement of women during colonialism. And I really was inspired by her as a woman, how to use your voice as a white woman. I did not grow up in any art context, and this was poetry in my native language, so it was a first experience of expression. Since then, I have dabbled in poetry as a thought process, putting down words, but it's also something very personal that I haven't always put out there. But it is a natural way of like thinking about thoughts and mixing facts and fiction, and that's what I experimented a bit with, like Black Lake Monologue.
Black Lake.
Do you know that?
I do know about it. I suppose one of the reasons why we're talking together today is because we do have a shared interest in the story behind why you wrote this Black Lake monologue. It's in a way a dedication, and it's written in relation to the East Dals woman, which has become a sort of Bergen myth. Maybe we could say.
Yeah.
Woman was found dead in the mountains in the 70s, and nobody has ever been able to find out exactly who she was ever. Anyway, the Black Lake Monologue is a book that you published a couple of years ago, isn't it? And I suppose a very personal for you way of dealing with very many of the facts and the rumours and the kind of truths that are available about this woman. So in a way, constructing a narrative of who she was and her life.
Yeah. I think that I discovered this case when I just moved to Bergen, and it wasn't so well known as it is now. It's more like a Bergen rumor, or like Bergen's own unsolved mysterious case. And coming from photography, of course, I wanted to see photographic evidence, but it became very interesting to see that she did not have a story. Her story only began when she was found, and this woman that died, she has this new persona of like the Isdal woman, but actually she had a very tragic death, and I was always interested in the objects that she left behind, because there's also all these rumors about suitcases that was found at the police station and what did they contain, and just very strange things like wigs and different passports and different currencies of money.
Yeah.
And so I was very interested in the objects and what can these objects actually tell about her life.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle, isn't it? A puzzle that's kind of constructed by the objects and the observations about her and what was left behind from her. You've been, for example, working with these. This is just one of the many packets that you've been working with in relation to a show that you had a few years ago. What's inside these, and what are they?
There was 9, because she had 9 identities and 9 names, so that's why I had 9 packages. But inside of them is what you see here. It's a crystal quartz, and of course this is used in mysticism and a lot of things, but it's also used in watches.
Yeah.
So crystal's always been used for time and giving vibrations.
Yes.
So that's something that I put in the soil in the area where I thought she was found during the period that she checked out of her hotel room, that she went missing until she was found. So that was 7 days. It was just a kind of, I think,
almost like a ritual.
Yeah, to acknowledge that time of the year. In November, it's when Bergen is the darkest.
Definitely.
Like this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at this clock at the moment. You mentioned it in relationship to the quartz, and there's something interesting about time. Obviously, when we're talking and we're trying to make sense of the objects that we're looking at, and also your background as a photographer. Time really comes in as this very essential part of it. But it also makes me think about the way that we are dealing with information in the world, and sort of like how we process everything that is around us and our experiences. Experiencing time, experiencing synchronicity and issues like that, connecting ideas and situations that make sense to us.
Yeah.
I suppose this is also something that you're dealing with in your way of working, how different aspects of things that appear and might be hidden if the situation was different. There's these kinds of hidden structures in a way.
And also how to trace these things. That's quite hidden and a bit more instinctive.
The writer David Reef once said to his mother, Susan Sontag, that if he had to use a single word to describe her, it would be avidity. This too might suit the woman who filled 3 floors of a house with gracefully aging 1950s furniture, painted rocks, bundles of her own hair, metal scraps, bird nests, and 2 decades of annotated issues of Art in America. If she had any ambivalence toward the material world, I cannot identify it in the residue of her life. I tend to seize up in the mix of such accumulation, gripped by curiosity and reverence for the things themselves, and a simultaneous fear that they could possess more than I could ever possess them.
I've entered the art world quite late. I always wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know how to get there. My current practice mutated out of photography, and I used to be a trained commercial photographer and made my living from it. And I started photographing with my dad's camera as soon as I saw it, or, he would let me.
Yeah.
And for me, photography taught me how to experience the world. I think you pay attention to it and understand it in another way than when you're just walking or passing by. It's just a very, very different way to be in the world and to observe it. And so, there's this relationship to the poetry, with the photography and poetry. For me, they are cousins. They're not so intellectual, but they frame realities that were never quite resolved in narrative terms. So with my photography came my way to see light and colour. I think once you can observe how light moves during the day, you can't really unsee it. It's always there. And I still walk into galleries or exhibition spaces and have a look at the bulbs and colour temperature. It's always in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And this also comes from having long training hours in a photographic studio, and you would just walk into this dark space. There's nothing. So whatever you were putting down is you put something down in the void and you make your own construction of a still life. Yeah. So I think I'm very aware that I do construct my work, installations as well. It's very staged, and it's almost as it can be photographed from any angle. I don't know if you experience it that way. But I do seduce the viewer. I know how to use this light and colour to seduce someone. So everything looks in the place when you would enter a space or look at a photo that I've made, but it's only when you keep the viewer a bit longer you start to realise what's out of place. Or at least I hope people see that. Yeah. But I want my audience to match my level of curiosity of the world, and I don't want to give people an easy way out.
That's well, that's quite good. I mean, I can't help to think about when you're talking about both the way that you photograph and the way that you make installations and the way that you, in a way, view your surroundings and construct them in a way. I can't help to think about your exhibition Apple Puma, which was a large installation at Bergen Kunsthall a couple of years ago. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen an installation or a show in Bergen that's been so kind of radically, that's so radically shifted the space and the atmosphere and the meaning and, you know, like everything. It's a really special show. The way that I mean, when you're talking about constructing both imagery and space, it's you know, it's something that you did completely in that show. Do you want me to say some things about it? I mean, like, what was very sort of dominating in the show were the birds. I mean, how many were they?
There were 28.
28 canary birds. I can remember coming into the space through this red plastic material and being overwhelmed by the sound of the birds singing. So these canary birds singing as not just a background, but a very active part of what was going on in there, trying to kind of, you know, make sense of it. It's like, I mean, it was just... It was really interesting and really special. So, yeah, let's talk about it a bit.
I didn't advertise it as a living installation or that there would be birds. So it was quite tricky to keep all of the secrets.
Yes.
So that was definitely something that the viewer had to figure out themselves, so that it's not a sound piece, but it is a sound piece, but from an actual bird.
And very live and
very loud.
Performative.
Yeah. Just back to like the color and using props, setting up. The canaries. I choose to use canaries for a few specific reasons, not just birds. Canaries have a long history of color feeding to change their natural color, which used to be like a very mousy green. So much of the world is controlled by humans, and I've been very sensitive about racial politics that the animals can maybe be a way of using as a substitute for that.
Yeah. Well, I think canary birds, I've never been close to one myself, but I do associate it with a certain colonialized way of both thinking and living. You know, you've spoken earlier about how canaries were used in coal mines and almost as sort of operators of levels of, you know, sort of very sort of existential, I mean, being used as sort of labour almost, you know. That's just one part of what I'm thinking about.
Well, just back to the exhibition, the whole exhibition started with a photographic field trip to South Africa. And I was doing like my own personal road trip back home and photographing, and mainly photographing diamond mining sites and what remains of the landscape. So Apple Puma is like one of the photos from a mining site.
Okay.
And, you know, you visit family when you're away and you have to keep up with their gossip and rumours that you have to catch up over the years. And I was really thinking a lot about my grandmother and the life that she led. She didn't remarry. She didn't like men. She was a very lonely person, but she had this pet, Jasper, which was a canary. And when I was younger and I would want to try and, like we say, slip out, like leave the house. This canary was like a watchdog. It would start singing as soon as you touch keys. So I was thinking a lot about this animal-human relationship and that she enjoyed his company more than us. And the other side of it is like my grandfather used to tell me about the canaries going into being used in the coal mines, and I was quite terrified that something that belongs in the sky, you would take underground in a very dark tunnel. So I guess it's like very personal and just a mix of thoughts that I was working with. Making more of a shrine for the canaries that was used in the mine and my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was it was a place to be able to use a lot of time as a viewer, experiencing the installation as well, because I suppose there wasn't really a format to it other than what would happen there.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, you've got quite a lot of documentation of this show on your website. So for people listening who haven't seen the show or don't really sort of understand what we're talking about, I think once you see some documentation from it, with all of these, there's different shots of the space and of parts of the space and of the birds communicating with each other and eating, and it looks like they're kissing sometimes. It looks like they're quarrelling. It's like there's this kind of completely, like this parallel world that you've created in the space. So many elements that are interesting. The colour you mentioned, the birds, obviously.
Yes. It was a very, I think, sensory exhibition.
Yeah, definitely.
Playing on colour and sound. I also had a video piece that was of thunder.
Exactly.
And also like the sound the birds responded to. Yeah.
In what way did the birds respond to the sound? Because I've listened to the I've seen and listened to the video piece afterwards, and there's a mixture of the thundery, sort of very bassy type of sound that is part of or what you're filming, basically.
Very windy too.
Yeah, windy as well. At the same time, you've added a heartbeat thump sound, which comes in and out of it.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, I can't remember myself how I'm not so sure if I thought about the birds' reaction to the video sound in that show, but like in what way did that work out for you?
I mean, when we got the birds, they were from a breeder and a pet shop, so for me it was very important to have them singing, so I was playing YouTube training videos that's online for canaries to sing, because there's like the whole, best singer wins the prize.
Yes. This mix of a sort of cultivated and natural being in a way.
So in the beginning, like the sound of the video, the thunder and the storm approaching was a lot louder, but later I turned it down because the canaries responded too much to it, so very, very noisy, and also didn't want to work them up all the time. But it was summer, so they were courting and breeding. The sound was not needed.
No. Yeah, because they were trying to attract each other,
and they did.
Obviously. This is a remnant from the Apple Puma show. The exhibition contained elements of different types of sculptural and object-based matter. You had several neon pieces. You also had many of these bottles that were placed in relation to the actual light in the space.
For me, that I was trying to find the balance between what is a photograph and like what can be like a sculpture or like an art piece, because these were something that I photographed first, and it is a rose and water that's used for grave decoration for people that can't afford proper gravestones. Okay. So it's really like from this very poor area, also from what's left of the mining fields, and the class, you can really see the class difference when you go to a graveyard between proper headstones and people using these objects as, a way of marking something happened. Yeah. But what interests me is like how they decay over time, and how these objects like would simply just dissolve into their host, kind of like fossilizing in their own plastic containers.
Mm.
So they have a life and an afterlife as well.
Yeah.
And it's a slow process, and it's very melancholy, of course, not like a celebratory one.
Mm.
And when I first observed them, it was like driving and seeing things glittering in the landscape.
Yeah.
So I'm really still looking at light and how things react to light.
Definitely.
So I was placing them around Bergen shot, tracing the light, and just...
Yeah.
They were scattered on the floor, like you can scatter words on a page as poetry. Just a way to communicate meaning, but more just conjuring atmosphere.
Yeah. And it was a very odd atmosphere, very something that I don't think anybody had been in before. A wonderful show.
And this is also something that I use to trace the light with, is these are photographic gels, I would say, that you use in studio to create like a sunset or atmosphere.
Exactly.
So it was fun for me to have time to make the show. I had 2.5 weeks, so not just 2 days of having to put everything up.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's really part of what is what is needed, and what's I mean, when you're working with something that you can't control, right?
Yeah.
Like how the birds would like, even, I don't know, just how they would react to just being in this space, and so many elements that were without control. In relation to the show that we've just spoken about, Scott Rettberg wrote quite a long text about it, and part of it here I want to sort of re-quote him on. He says about the show and sitting in there, he says, "This was not the canary's natural environment. And yet, as the canaries chirped and nibbled and hopped and flitted across the factory floor, offering me the occasional sideways glance, it felt much more like I was a creature under bemused observation than the canaries were. It would be too much to say that I had stepped inside a bird cage, or that I had come to take the place of the bird, but the exhibition represented a clear disruption in the order of things and in our presumptions of nature." So I really liked that show and that work of yours, exactly because of what he just said there. There was something very upside down about it, in a kind of natural, normal, logic way of thinking, at least. I mean, and you said yourself that you like to make installations and work that trigger instinctive knowledge in a way. What do you mean by that?
I guess it goes back to not underestimating my audience. Slowing things down. And it's important that I think we all do have an instinctive knowledge.
Of course we do. As human beings.
Yeah.
I definitely think we do.
And I was, it was experimental, like having 28 birds in Bergen in this old meat packing factory flying around, and how it would be perceived. I went through different stages. Like example, like the objects on the floor was to slow down people so they would walk slower.
Yeah.
But really surprised how people behaved once they entered the space, and they just, instead of seeing an exhibition in 10 minutes, there was people just spending time in there for like an hour or 2 hours, and returning as well. And that's really, for me, that's wonderful that, you can achieve something like people slow down.
Yeah. And in a way, kind of connecting us to this feeling of consideration and time, and valuing these very, sort of instinctive and empathic ways of being. That's what
Yeah.
I thought was really beautiful about it.
There was 2 dogs in the show.
Really?
Yes.
And how did they react?
I was there every day, and I was extremely nervous when I saw someone take their dog up. And the first dog was, of course, Valentino. The dog didn't even notice the birds. And the second
Really?
dog was like a tiny black poodle. And when I spoke to the woman about her dog, she said like he grew up with a parrot
All right.
that used to ride on his back. But the parrot died 2 years ago, so she was bringing the dog
To
to see the birds.
Really?
Yes, so it was also a bit
And how did the poodle react then?
just very calm, like looking at them, not chasing them or anything like that.
That's
And-
also the instinctive way of a
Yeah.
dog, probably.
And as soon as I would leave the exhibition feeding the canaries, I would just notice all the other birds
Yeah.
on the outside, also just going about their thing. And the canaries were like clockwork. They went to bed every night at 7. No matter if it was daylight or not, they would just be quiet and disappear. And like, that's it.
So there is this very, in a way, it triggers this feeling of trust in the ways that we work as humans and animals in this huge coexistence. That's such a beautiful thing.
Thank you.